Good. So at today's webinar, we will look into stop speaking through the literature and engaging in critical analytics. And we hope that that provides some more learning about how to identify and build on current best practice, as identified in a set of thesis excerpts that we will explore today and work through. And specifically, we hope that the learning outcome would be to understand the difference in between just summarizing and reporting versus critical analysis, and to assess where you are in your writing, so to provide you with the ability to assess where you are in your writing, to understand that there will be old and less skilled writing sitting next to new and shiny writing, including in your thesis, that cannot be avoided, and we will look into the why that cannot be avoided, and to learn how to read the literature with a problem, not a solution focus, which is very important, to practice how to draw and compare evidence and data, and not only conclusions, to understand how to critically reflect on and how to challenge conclusions put forward in the literature. And towards the end, we will engage in a group activity. Given that we are a small group, likely we can do that together, and look into against what is a literature review critical. Now, as said, this webinar will take advantage of both unpublished writings and work available from publicly available thesis repositories to look at recently submitted theses. And the unpublished writings consist, for example, of a stock taking of my very own thesis, but also the thesis of Anna, who's today with us at the webinar, and how this thesis developed over time. And we will look into current best practice, but also into work that has, let's say, it's a potential to be improved. And ideally, due to that, you will increase your ability to critically assess the quality of the work of others, but also of yourself. Are there any questions to this point in time? Good. Now, then let's look into the difference in between summarizing and reporting versus critical analysis. Now, descriptive writing is something that students love to do at the beginning, and they can do that up to the hundreds of pages very quickly. So descriptive writing states what happened, what something is like, or how something is done. It might be describing a process, it might provide a definition, and it shows some opinions. So everything lightweight, it is descriptive in nature. Critical writing, however, is that what can take you hours to just complete a single page. Reason being, you engage in a critical analytical analysis. In a critical analysis, you establish an object of analytics and you look at it from different sides based upon data that you hold from the literature, but also in parts perhaps from own observations. So this is very time consuming and it is hard. It is hard because it costs brain power, and therefore you will think more likely than you write. And initially, students often write very much descriptive, and over time it turns critical. Now, having said that, doctoral students are often told by their supervisors that their work needs to move from description to analysis. So what does it mean? Have you wasted your time in doing all that describing? Well, in short, no. And the no comes for a number of reasons. First of all, a great part of what you reach, a great part of the knowledge that you accumulate is just for you. So that you do that in a written format, that's fine. You wouldn't need to do it if you would memorize enough out of your brain. So it might not make it into your thesis to that extent, but still it is useful with regards to helping you to build up your knowledge. And then it builds the start to come on top with critical analysis. For example, you might describe a process, what happened, how you have set up an experiment and so like, and then move further from there to the critical analysis. Now let's look into those two examples. On the top one, we see initial writing that is saying behavior is a commonly used concept, even though the definition of the concept of behavior itself is not a clearly established one. This section aims to provide a working definition of the concept of behavior to serve as a working base for this research. So this is pretty much just working over definitions. It tells how other people define things, so to establish a common vocabulary. This, of course, can be useful for the thesis, but more importantly, it is useful for you as an author to make some sense and to get some clarity about concepts or how people refer to different things with the same name or to the same things differently. Now, in the lower, you find a more advanced writing, which says the term learning material could be defined as any entity containing a chunk of information useful for somebody to develop knowledge in a certain context. It could be a book, a URL, an instructor. This definition is suitable. So you go here one step further and you take the bold decision to say it's suitable. And afterwards, you would need to explain why it is seen to be suitable. So this is already one step further. You can see still the word could be defined. So as said, as more often you see the word defined, as earlier writing likely you will have in front of you. Likewise, there is a messenger narrative versus the message narrative. Early writing and more descriptive writing is characterized by a messenger narrative. Like, for example, author A was saying that apples are good, author B said, however, that too many apples in a given day are not good, therefore both authors. So the narrative here is authors, but not apples, or why they might be good or not good. Once you advance and become more analytical, the message becomes the narrative. Like in this case below, where you look in economic barriers, and the economic barriers you look at from different points of views, and you express it with words like with regards to these or as well as, for example, so you bring in further evidence. This then is moving one step further from descriptive writing away into analytical writing. And as you go along, this analytical, critical writing will increase. Now, how can you assess where you are in your writing and your critical engagement with the literature? I would argue that's rather obvious and quick. Just check how long it takes you to write it. Is that easy, quick? Look into your writing. Does it lack evidence? Does it lack references? Is it generic? Now, this example here, this definition suggests that human referral refers to how such a definition can be applied. The term behavior, again, it's just defining things, might thus be understood as, again, just defining things. This definition just, so you can check for yourself where you are in your writing by looking for the very simple word definition, or for the word defines, or for the author says. And your word editor of choice will deliver you the results and show you clearly where you are working still only over definitions, or where definitions already don't appear. And there's a chance is higher that you will find some critical analysis, though you might just describe a process like you have been doing that, or the methodology will be like that. So it might still be just still descriptive writing without using the word definition. But if you find the word definition, the likelihood is great. You are still not. So when does it become critical? Now, once the writing is painful, slow, and once it becomes more specific, once you see a lot of evidence, and once you see a lot of references, which also might be combined in the same argument, that means you are synthesizing from a number of sources information into a single argument, and thereby take on a bold decision to be judgmental. Now, here, for example, energy-saving behaviors can be distinguished between efficiency and curtailment behavior, which often entail an investment such as blah, blah, blah. And then you see that comes with 3 references. And as you go further, references are added. So this is an example for critical analytical writing. And how can you test yourself about that? If you find words like contrary, however, despite, anything that is showing contrary positions, then you can be more sure that this is on the way to critical analytics. And if you want to find more words for those that you could look for, the Manchester Phrase Bank is very advisable from Manchester University. It provides you with a very complete phrase book of analytical terms and of descriptive terms, which will allow you to check your document, so to see and understand where you are in your journey. Now, as we come into the third part, are there any questions so far? Okay. Then understand that there will be old and less skilled writing sitting next to new and shiny writing, including and in particular in your thesis. Now, the point here is, if you would update your thesis continuously, you would never finish, right? So at one point in time, you need to say good is good enough. But at this point in time where you say that, you will look back over a time frame of perhaps 3 to 8 years, which also implies that some of those writings will be more from the early times and others will be just from a minute ago. Now, if you would try to get everything up to the standard of a minute ago, then there you go for another several months. So understand good is good enough, and at one point it must be good enough, and there you let it. But then also new sits next to old. Now let's look into this example, which is still more summarizing. Significance of theme and qualitative content and thematic analysis is the title, and then it tells me what the theme is. Theme is the main product of data analysis that yields practical results in the field of study. Now, this type of writing still can make it into the final version of your thesis, because it might just be the scene setting part of the methodology chapter, which tells by you which options you could have been taken. It shows and outlines the different avenues that you could have went down before you then come into the analytical and say, yeah, well, actually I was settling on A and not of B because of. And there comes the critical analytical part. Likewise, once you describe how things have been developing, for example, a process, like in this case, in this phase of data analysis, researchers reflect on the process of organizing codes and compare them in terms of similarities and differences to assign a place to each cluster of codes in relation to the research question. And there you go further on. So you describe how things work in generally, and afterwards you would refer them back more specifically to your research. So again, reporting of a process can be part of your thesis, but for a clear purpose and therefore limited to this purpose. Now, this is a part, however, that examiners and readers more generally would want to see and expect from a thesis, which is a critical analytical writing. Like, for example, here, qualitative methods are widely used in learning and teaching research and scholarship, while the epistemologies and theoretical assumptions can be unfamiliar and sometimes challenging to those from, for example, science and engineering backgrounds. There's wide appreciation of the value of these methods. So you see, you compare different literature sources and you build up an argument. And this is still not very, very critical analytical writing, but already fairly building up and something you can expect to see emerging over time. Now, this example is from my own thesis, which is a very early draft where exactly something was reported, how it works, and it still has a messenger focus, it has disconnected paragraphs, the subsequent sentence follows not on the previous sentence, and it still shows the arguing over conclusion and not over evidence. And as visible very much in as referred to in. As referred to in means I was not consulting the original work. Therefore, I was just picking up on the conclusions reached by Lacani and von Hippel, which concluded something about other works. So it's like, you don't know the original source, you don't know how other people came to their conclusion. So as referred to in, as soon as an examiner or supervisor is seeing that, they rightfully will question you on that. So if you don't have access to the original source, use different literature. Now, this argument over time, however, has become more critical, and you see that parts of the initial writing still continue to be there, and this is now a shortened part, and were complemented or exchanged with more new analytical writing, and there are still some mistakes that will be fixed later. So this is a normal evolutionary process of your thesis. And not only of your thesis, but also of the works of others, and not limited to thesis. So establishing the reading lens that allows you to quickly see, okay, this is now not so good quality, and then scan through the work further. And if you see it stays at the lousy quality level, okay, then it's lousy quality. But if you see, oh, now wait, here's something good and new, so then that's slightly more new. And that can then make the work still of a higher quality. Fourth part, learn to read the literature with a problem and not a solution focus. And if you're unsure what's the difference in between a problem and a solution, we were running 1 or 2 webinars specifically on that matter, so take a look at that. Problem-focused literature review example here. Humans hold a limited capacity for worrying. They have a finite pool of worry, therefore tending to view near-term threats as more relevant and of greater urgency. And you see everything that's here highlighted in yellow: future problems, not to immediately react to threats, balancing long-range worries, immediate concerns. So it's all negative, right? Because we look at problems. Problems are not shiny, solutions are, problems not. So if you see those words, then certainly you're working rather over the problem end. And a problem focus means to look at what is not working, what is broken, what is unwanted, what is limiting, all the things that you won't want them to be as they are. And understand what your research is looking for, because if you're looking for a solution, then very likely your experiment and your research will be set up in exactly that way to get an answer on how things should be shiny. Right. But this is not how it should be. Yeah, keep the focus on the problem. And we can see in this example what that can look like. You have, as a research context, the university mission statement that the university seeks to provide students with a safe, healthy learning environment. Dormitories are one important aspect of the learning environment. But since 55% of the students live on campus and spend a significant amount of time working in their dorms, this is seen to be an important part of the work environment. The problem is here, however, the student dorms currently do not have air conditioning units. And during the hot season, it is common for room temperatures to exceed 80 degrees Fahrenheit. Therefore, many students report that they are unable to do homework in their dorm rooms, which obviously is hindering the progression of the students. Others report having problems sleeping, so then again, that will inhibit their progression. Now, there are 2 types of research questions that could be posed forward here. A solution-focused research question would sound like, how can we make the dorms more hospitable? Yeah, how could it be better? A problem-focused research question would ask, why are there no air conditionings in dorms? If it's so obvious that that is a problem, someone should have put there already air conditionings. So if none are there, there will be a reason, because it is clear that there should be some. So why are there none? And depending on the question, the research purpose will develop much differently. On the left side, we will see, in response to this problem, our study proposes to investigate several options for making the dorms more hospitable. So it's an invitation to just speculate. We plan to carry out an all-inclusive participatory investigation into options for purchasing air conditioners and different types of air conditioning. We will also consider less expensive ways to mitigate some or all of the problems noted above. I do not know where the above problems are noted, but it's claimed there are. If you see them, tell me. Now, on the right side, the research develops as follows. In response to this problem, our study proposes to investigate why there are no air conditionings in the dorms. We plan to carry out an all-inclusive participatory investigation so to understand why no air conditioning has been installed thus far. Apologies. We will investigate if the non-existence is due to economic, regulatory, budget, technical, or other unknown reasons. So it's an open-ended research that looks in all possible avenues, including other unknown reasons. So clearly, the research will develop very differently. And the research outcome on the solution focus will be based on random guesses and uncertainties, while the one on the right side that focuses on the problem will be based on a clear understanding of the situation and the range of actions that could be taken to then reach perhaps a solution or decide or understand that there is none. Good. Now, how to practice to draw and compare on evidence and data and not only on conclusions. Let's look into this example of an evidence-based argument, which is taken from Leeds University. There are a number of inherent methodological difficulties in evaluating treatment efficacy in this area. And this has contributed to controversy within the research literature surrounding treatment outcomes for this group of offenders. Firstly, while there is no doubt that the primary criterion of treatment success is a reduction in the rate of reoffending, reconviction data does not, in isolation, provide a realistic representation of actual levels of reoffending by this group. It is well established that there is a discrepancy between reoffending and reconviction rates. The latter underestimating the number of offenses committed. Indeed, a significant proportion of offenses committed by offenders are either unreported or do not result in the offender being convicted. Now, this is an evidence-based example. Let's go too quickly. A second. Good. Now, let's look at a conclusion versus evidence-based argument, both sitting side by side. At the left side, we see an evidence-based argument, which states that the reasons for attrition rates of 57.17% in doctoral programs, or about half, have been actively explored in the recent years. Research suggests that a number of problem domains appear to persist that apply to both immediate doctoral students as well as adult doctoral students. Such common problem domains are A, the inability to cope with work that has no clearly defined deadlines and milestones, as well as B, a difficulty in problematizing and analytical and critical thinking skills. So this is working again over evidence, and it's an example that I've been making up. So the statistics are indeed correct, and for the UK, they are even as high as 75%, which means 3 out of 4 students will not finish their doctoral study. Now, on the right side, you see a conclusion-based argument, which was taken from Cetheris, and this says disasters are often derived from the combination of hazard exposure, vulnerability, and insufficient means to mitigate or manage adverse consequences. In this interpretation, there are 2 main concepts related to disaster. First, hazard, which may develop into a disaster whenever the conditions of vulnerability and insufficient capacity to manage are present. Second, vulnerability, which is a state. So this is not only a conclusion-based argument, but it is also a very descriptive way of a very descriptive narrative on top of that. Now, the evidence-based argument, as said, works more over the details. You see at the right side statistics, which are used and then brought into the argument. And there's virtually no limit on increasing the level of analytics. As more as you increase the level of analytics, as more time it will take you to write. But at the end of the day, this will allow others to much better understand what you have been doing, to re-evaluate your evaluations, to re-examine what you have been doing, but also to build on your work and to take it further. Now, drawing on conclusions is also dangerous because of what is called in the US the telephone game effect, in the UK the Chinese whisperer effect, and in my German native language it would be the silent post effect, which means what is understood is changing constantly, so that there's no way to relate to the initial source and what has been found. Therefore, be advised to always look into the original data, because conclusions were made in context and used then afterwards by other researchers in other contexts once these were drawing on the literature, and now you want to use them for a third time within your context. So understand how the data was collected in the first place, how the analysis has been taking place, and whether or not you agree with how the conclusions have been reached. Exactly the re-experience, the re-conclude. If those criteria are applied for your writing, but also for your selection of the literature, that will put you on a relative safe path once it comes to the analytics. So ask yourself simple questions. How have the conclusions been reached? Can you tell that? Under what conditions have they been reached? Do you know that? How well does the data support the different arguments? And are there different arguments in the first instance? Yeah, those are answers that you should have once you look into the literature. Working over conclusions is very quick. Looking into the data can take time. So obviously you cannot look into each data set if you have hundreds of data of literature sources in your thesis, but those ones that belong to your key literature, please do make sure you know how those conclusions have been reached and what the data are and how the data has been collected and analyzed. And quite obviously, conclusions are drawn at the end. For any research project in any scientific discipline, drawing conclusions is the final and most important part of the process. Whichever reasoning process and research method were used, the final conclusion is critical and determining success or failure. If an otherwise excellent experiment is summarized by weak conclusions, the results will not be taken seriously. Now, this is not me saying that, but you will see the source on the downside right. And be invited to look in those sources that are put here forward in the webinar. To our best knowledge, we try to identify the sources that we think are of a good quality. Unfortunately, many university guides and guidelines are very misleading to students, to put it mildly. Now, having said that conclusions are drawn at the end, yes, well, so that the end is not the real end. It's funny to see if students send in a thesis and give it a name that ends with final. So it then comes back final 2, final 3, final 400, final 2001, final 2003. So understand, while the conclusions might be drawn at the end, there will be another end after the end. And you will revisit research question, fine-tune the literature review, adapt the narrative, complete and update the introduction chapter, write the abstract, and get the viva behind you. And afterwards, you do the same updates likely once again. So end is not an end, it's not an end. With this, we will come into the end of this webinar, into the sixth part, understand how to critically reflect on and how to challenge conclusions that are put forward in the literature, before we then close with a group activity. Challenging conclusions. We will look at two examples. Example R is from the University of Cumbria, which goes like, Brown maintains that leadership is an essential quality in nursing. This is confirmed by the recent requirements of the NHS plan. This plan has emphasized the importance of introducing the transformational model of leadership. Smith explains that this is a leadership which involves the use of charisma and interpersonal skills to enable achievement. Jones argues that the key characteristic of transformational leadership is empowering others to achieve. In my own experience, a leader with transformational qualities can make any team member feel that they have a useful part to play in the organization. This is confirmed by Fear, who argues that transformational leadership increases feeling of self-worth and capability in the team members. Now, you see at different points of view, you see the good and the not so good. What is not so good is the researcher stating, in my own experience, which is a fair thing to do, but then goes on with, this is confirmed by FEAR 2001. I wonder how FEAR in 2001 was looking into the researcher's own experience. What the author likely wants to say, the point the author wants to make, is that FEAR found something similar to the experience of the author. Now, however, this would require a critical and explicit analytics to show exactly where and what was similar. By just shortening and putting it in the current form, this is a clear flaw of the argument. So yes, the style is formal and flows well. It is paraphrasing to introduce evidence from the literature. So how well does it use the literature to back up statements being made? The literature is used to make a number of claims, and an attempt is made to find answers in the literature. However, each citation is not really explored or interpreted by the student. To what extent is it reflected? There is some reflection on the part of the student, and the answers from the literature are used to confirm these feelings. The student does not go far enough in trying to explain, justify these feelings. To what extent is it analytical and critical? There's an attempt to analyze a topic, but this is not done in great depth. The student does not question, evaluate the evidence from the literature, and therefore shows limited critical thinking. And these are the same type of feedback that often examiners provide after your viva, once the work is still not up to the standard. So you might want to read again your writings and evaluate where you are. Now let's look into a final example before we come into the group work and go off the record. So for you to have the chance to ask questions. A critical review of Goodwin et al. Decision-making in Singapore and Australia, the influence of culture on accountants, ethical decisions, accounting research journal. That's where it's coming from. Using host states and bonds, 5 cultural dimensions, Goodwin et al. Conducted a study on the influence of culture on ethical decision-making between 2 groups of accountants from Australia and Singapore. This research aimed to provide further evidence on the effect of cultural difference, since results from previous research have been equivocal. The study reveals that accountants from the 2 countries responded differently to the ethical dilemmas, in particular when the responses were measured using 2 of the 5 cultural dimensions. The result agreed with the prediction, since considerable differences existed between these 2 dimensions and Australians and Singaporeans. However, the results of the other dimensions provided less clear relationships, as the 2 cultural groups differed only slightly on the dimensions. To the extent that this research is exploratory, the results of the study provide insights into the importance of recognizing cultural difference for firms and companies that operate in international settings. However, several limitations must be considered in interpreting the study findings. In summary, it has to be admitted that the current study is still far from being conclusive. Further studies must be undertaken, better measures must be developed, and larger samples must be used to improve our understanding concerning the exact relationship between culture and decision-making. Despite some deficiencies in methodology, to the extent that this research is exploratory, an example trying to investigate an emerging issue, this study has provided some insights to account for culture in developing ethical standards across national borders. Now, this is a good example. It shows title and bibliographic details of the text. It is having a clear introduction. It has reporting verbs. It presents the aim and purpose of the article as well as the key findings. This sentence themes are focused on the text. Its transition, its signals provide structure and coherence. It's providing a reviewer's judgment, conclusion and summaries. And the modality used to express certainty and limit overgeneralizing is good in place. And it offers recommendations as much as concessive clauses assist in expressing a mixed response, and that qualifies the reviewer's judgment. So this type of argument is certainly of a decent or good quality, but it also will take time to build up such arguments. Now, if you want to train a bit further how to engage in critical analytics, check out our advanced training courses, which allow you to exactly train that. For those earlier in the research, the issue identification, problematizing, and research question framing course likely might be more appropriate. For those that are more through their research, the course on critical analysis and drawing on the literature will certainly be advisable. With this, we come into the group activity, and here with also stop the recording, so to give you the chance to ask questions off the record. Stop.